Thank you. And once again, like the other speakers, thank you for inviting me. It's interesting, when I was asked to come and speak on leadership, the invitation said, pick something that you have learnt that you'd like to pass on to an audience of your peers. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And I remembered something about, when you're presenting ideas to people, and we'll talk about influencing in a moment, some people will take the idea away based on the words that you write or that they hear. Some will take the ideas away based on the pictures you show them. And some of them, and I think I call this audience self-service, some of them take away the ideas that they brought into the room, regardless of what you say or what pictures. So you can decide over the next 10 minutes which one of the three you are. There are some words, there are some pictures, and hopefully you're all capable of audience self-service. Just a little bit of brief personal background. I am the global CIO for Save the Children. We have a network of IT leaders around the world. I was lucky enough to be asked to take this role on in 2012. Prior to that, I was the European head of IT and shared services leader for Unilever. And before that, I had a range of consulting and IT services roles. So I have moved from the seller side, if you like, to the buyer side of the industry. I'm going to talk today about network leadership. And before I do, just again, one thought to have. Leadership, the way I've experienced it in working for people and the way that I've tried to develop my leadership, the analogy I would use is about having a variety of different styles, adaptive leadership, whatever you want to call it, to use at different times and different situations. And the best analogy I heard for that was golf. It's a game I try to play. It's a game I'm not very good at, and I still enjoy it all the same. But the example being of taking the time to select the right club to play each golf shot with. If you try to play every shot with the same club, which frankly on a bad round I do, you won't be very successful. And the trick, I think, for good golfers is that they actually can use all the clubs in the bag, and that they have the right wisdom and experience to decide which club to use for which shot. So if you keep that in mind, for me, network leadership is just another club in your bag. Okay? I'm not trying to teach you how to be leaders, but hopefully you'll see some differences. Just a little bit about Save the Children then. I obviously had heard of Save the Children. I grew up with it being one of the leading UK charities in my mind. Certainly what I didn't understand until I joined in 2012 is that it's globally a $2 billion organisation, founded in the UK in 1919 by a fabulous woman called Eglantine Jebb. And that's one of the easier founder names to remember wherever you work. Quickly followed by many other European copy, if you like, or franchises, maybe I was to say. Eglantine maintained until her death, she maintained a personal ownership of the brand and how we move forward. But the vision and the mission, and this is something that was put together by the leadership team in 2010, is as we show there. We're a rights-based organisation. We are an advocacy organisation. We're a campaigning organisation. Obviously a fundraising organisation and a service delivery organisation. So we have an interesting mission, which you were kind enough to summarise, and I sometimes do the same thing. When I'm talking to my old consumer products colleagues, I say my job is to keep the children alive that will become their future consumers, and please will you give me some pro bono support, which in many cases they do. But fundamentally, we're actually about breakthroughs. So leadership in this business, we're in the change business. Save the Children is a change-driven organisation. We are trying to make a change in the way the world treats children, and we're trying to make that change immediately in the case of saving lives and child soldiers in conflict and female genital mutilation and child protection, HIV victims. It needs to be immediate. It doesn't need to be in 9 months' time or 6 months' time. It needs to be tomorrow or preferably tonight. But it needs to be lasting. And again, I think that's the challenge that we all we all live with. How do you make change quickly but make it last? So again, I think there's a leadership component to that. This part of the speech is about complexity, or its mirror image simplicity. We are a complex organisation. We have to be a complex organisation. We've got many different stakeholders. We have to be organised in a way that optimises for several different parameters. This is about as simple a chart as I could draw you. There isn't a global organisation chart. To give you an example, we have 30 different fundraising organisations. Each one of those organisations has a national-based board of trustees because of the governance of charitable fundraising. We then have an international service delivery organisation, including 4 global advocacy offices located broadly with the European Union, the African Union, the UN, and New York, I think, yes. So New York, Washington, Ethiopia, and Brussels. And then we deliver in over 60 countries where we have country offices and management structures, but we actually touch the lives of children in over 120 countries, sometimes having to work from across the border because we're not actually allowed to operate within the country. So there is a necessary level of complexity. On top of that, of course, we have multiple cultures. It's not a homogenous Save the Children. I've just spent the last 2 days with Save the Children Norway, which is known as Redd Barna. If any of you speak Norwegian or Swedish, better than I do, you'll translate that anyway. But that's a very strong national brand in Norway and in Sweden. We have an international brand of Save the Children, but we have local national brands in many countries. Those brands are very important, and the way that people think about the country. In Norway, we are a child rights campaigning organisation. They don't know very much about what we do for humanitarian work. They don't know about the food aid that we ship to the Horn of Africa. What they do know is that we co-authored the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And every strategy discussion that a senior Norwegian leader comes to, they will bring you back to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's an article of faith. They're not that interested in world-class supply chain. With all due respect, they see our purpose as slightly different. So we're a multi-purpose organisation with multiple cultures, multiple boards, multiple CEOs. The other interesting thing, which I'm going to spend a moment talking about, is we could, if we wanted to, have an interesting discussion about who's our customer. Okay? And this chart, which I'm going to speak about in terms of leadership as well, in my first 3 or 4 months, I had very strongly argued cases for organising all of our thinking around the donor, and equally strong cases for organising all our thinking around the beneficiary. Now, I understand, commercial background, the shareholder is important in commercial businesses and the consumer, and you can make a case for tying the two together, and what's good for the consumer is good for the shareholder. I've heard that, I've spoken that, and to some extent I've always believed some of that. It ought to be true in international development, but sometimes the donors feel a very long way away from the beneficiaries, and sometimes the beneficiaries have no voice anyway, so it's very hard for us to know what they're really thinking. And there's some of the opportunities. I'm not going to speak about technology opportunities particularly today, but one of the opportunities for digital and for technology generally is to give our beneficiaries a voice, and social media being an obvious way to do that. The message, this is the picture bit of the message. Network leadership, the metaphor I've been using is that IT needs to enable a networked organisation. We have to be networked. We can't be hierarchical with that structure, with those multiple governance groups, with those multiple stakeholder matrices. We have to be highly networked. IT needs to become the digital nervous system within Save the Children. That metaphor has been partially successful. I try different things out on different audiences. The other thing that we've done here is you notice that if you knew Save the Children and the functions, every function on Save the Children is on that chart except IT. So I've taken IT off the chart, remembering that we don't really have an org chart anyway, so nobody told me I couldn't. So I did, and it's my function. I can take it off the chart if I want to. But what I've done is I've basically made it the lines between the boxes. So what I tell my team is, your job is on any chart, when it's on a whiteboard, when it's on a flip chart, you've got to draw the entities, you've got to draw the diagrams that people recognize, and then you've got to draw the lines between the boxes. And that's where you take ownership. That seems to be working. So network leadership as a picture, think of it as the lines between the boxes. Just some words, though, as I come to it. I was going to use this as a summary, but I think just to give you the chance to look at all of it. It's not authority-based leadership. It's much more about behavior. You can't assume that there is a governance group in Save the Children to get decisions that you need to make investments. So the authority-based leader would struggle. What you do is, the behavioral leadership thing is you form a group of the right people. You find a name of something that doesn't exist today. You set it up, you run it a couple of times, and then you propose something to it. And by and large, if it's a sensible proposal, it will get agreed, and you move on. So, if you can't find a steering group, you set one up. It's not an individual leadership model. You have to be collective. We don't have the negotiating power that some of the larger corporates do. Microsoft Office 365 looked like a great opportunity for us, but the economics wouldn't work 18 months ago. 3 months later, having talked to all of the other heads of IT for Plan International, for CARE, for Concern, for Oxfam, we put together a proposal that Microsoft accepted. Doesn't hurt that Bill Gates is obviously part of the Gates Foundation now and very supportive of our sector, to make Office 365 a donation product. It is now. So we don't pay for Office 365 at all. But that was only because we collectively went to Microsoft and said, this is an opportunity for you to set the standard for international development. And there were enough of us with enough power collectively. None of us individually could have got them to do that. Well, maybe not as quickly. A couple of other, I'm not going to give an example of all of those. Emergency response, again, everybody's aware of the Ebola work that's going on at the moment. I'm too humble to even claim to be playing a major role in that. There were some fantastically talented and committed individuals, some of whom have only been working for us for the last 3 months because there's a huge surge capacity which the UK government asked us to put together with the MOD. But many of the people, this is not their first campaign, but Ebola is slightly different. The level of personal risk that some of the staff are working under is great. But fundamentally what we're doing is we're working with the emergency telecoms cluster of the UN to actually get, and there isn't even a standard for VHF radio. One of the key safety items in the field, they've spent 2.5 years trying to decide whether they should move to the new standard. We've managed now, through pulling a lot of people together in the field, to get at least a temporary decision made so that everybody's using the same equipment. Because frankly, many of you will be contributing money, and you will end up with it buying lots and lots of different radios that don't talk to each other. One of the real problems of pro bono and gift in kind is that most gift in kinds don't talk to each other. And that's the problem that we as IT leaders have to sort out. And my final example is the IT strategy and this idea of bottom-up, peer-to-peer, top-down. In this case, actually, I think the right model is all three, but I'll contrast in terms of the volume. I spend a lot of my time doing bottom-up leadership. I find a lot of my time planting ideas in people's minds. The level of ambition for IT, and particularly things like mobile or social or cloud, in Save the Children when I arrived was very low. The digital divide is real. Many of our constituents are in the countries that the World Bank tells you are growing and mobile adoption is growing faster than fixed. That's all true, but maybe not in the communities that we're helping. So we do have to be mindful of that. However, we've got to be ambitious. So sometimes I have to plant the idea. At least a third of our IT strategy came back played to me by our field directors, our country directors, after me having gone on field trips and left ideas behind. Left pictures on people's whiteboards or actually on people's blackboards, because, as you might imagine, many of our education sites in the field don't have whiteboards, they have blackboards, or they have walls that the kids write on. So I've written on walls in Kenya, I've drawn some of these pictures, I've tried to get people to talk to me about what sort of simple phones could they use. And some of the strategy, some of the opportunities presented back to us from the field. A little bit mischievous, a little bit Machiavellian, but fundamentally a huge level of engagement because people put those ideas forward as their own. So, to close, it's a favourite game whenever CIOs are gathered together that we come up with a new definition of CIO. So my proposal for you for network leadership is the collaborative influencing officer and network leadership. And I hope that helps some of you as you go away from here tonight. Thank you.